Welcome everyone to another month of Brands and Outliers. This is our internal team call where we go through all of the brands that are doing interesting things in their categories. And we also look at outliers. So any brands or movements or anything in culture that is an anomaly that could give us an indication of where the future of a space is going and things that we should be paying attention to. So with that, I'll give it to Rebecca and Holly to take it away.
Great. Thanks, Jasmine. So this first one we have is what we call the Splintering Authenticity, especially with the emergence of AI this year, just reflecting on this year, we're kind of coming to the end of the year now. We're, seeing this definition of what being authentic means just really continue to change and evolve. And we've already been seeing this a lot obviously with social media, and we've already been questioning like what we post, like what is considered authentic, and now every new social media app is like trying to become like the most quote unquote authentic app. I'm sure we've all heard of Labs at this point. It just seems like every few months, like we're still trying to work this problem of like, how do we present ourselves the most authentically online? And what does that even mean anymore with also, again, like the emergence of AI and that being such a huge conversation this year. So if we go to the next slide, Victoria Buchanan, she works cultural research and foresight at Nike. She also used to be at the Future Laboratory, and she shared this on her LinkedIn, shared this Bloomberg article specifically about how the word authentic was named word of the year, which kind of makes sense. Again, like I mentioned, there's a lot of interest that is sort of driving conversations around AI. And one of the reasons people searched was because it just also has a lot of different meanings. One, including like quote unquote, not false or imitation, but also being, quote, true to one's own personality, spirit, or character, which is interesting because what that means is that we now no longer have like an objective version of authenticity anymore. And that just sort of the line between what is real and what is fake is just permanently blurred. And so when authenticity just comes down to the individual, like how do we then as outsiders trust like what is authentic and what is not authentic? Like, does that change? Like perhaps it doesn't. Like how do we even like measure authenticity moving forwards as AI again continues to evolve into the future? And like, do we even care anymore? Like if it's authentic or not authentic, do we have like different ways of interpreting that? Is it more just about like how we perceive is what is authentic, or is it the fact that like that entity itself has to prove that it in itself is authentic? So just a lot of like questions there.
Yeah, there's a term I heard recently called semantic broadening. So it's from etymology, and it's sometimes words like the type of meaning expands, and so. Yeah, that was a really interesting video I saw about like words that came from like Delulu, and how Delulu came from like a K-pop thing, and it used to be a delusional fan, and then it semantically widened to just being anyone who's delusional. And so it's kind of relevant to that. And I wonder with AI just how much the meaning of this word, to your point, is going to change.
I think also it's kind of gone through the ringer, the word itself too. I was doing a podcast interview for an employer brand podcast yesterday. And we were talking about like authenticity in recruitment and this whole, the discussion of authenticity so much in like brand cultures internally. And speaking of like broadening the definition, we were talking about how authenticity at some point came to mean bringing your whole self to work, which I think we're all kind of like having a hangover from that now. Like maybe bringing your whole self to work it wasn't good for the employer or the employee. And now we're kind of like redefining what authenticity means in the workplace as well. And yeah, I mean, if we're in a post-truth world, you could argue that the word authentic, what does it even mean? And interestingly, authentic used to carry like a moral charge. Like being authentic was morally superior. But Rebecca, what you're talking about, I think points to the fact that we're even wondering if like it's a moral thing. Like, is it morally right to be authentic, or is it okay to like prefer things that are fake or things that are fabricated or generated or AI, not quite real? I think that's what's really starting to challenge what that word means.
Yeah, like explicitly saying that this is performance is in itself also authentic, like considering that as something as authentic. Yeah, that's interesting.
I think the key thing to watch here is the line between what is authentically made by a human and made by AI is, because I think already certain image generation things, if you take an AI generated image and modify it enough, then it's made by a human, right? So it's already a very blurry line, but the question is how far does that go to eventually, I made a feature length film entirely with AI, but I made it and it's me and it's authentic. And so I don't know, but this line is moving fast.
And what's interesting, I think, too, is like just laws, are not keeping up. We're not moving at that pace of, is it for books, for film, like you mentioned, like what, or even fashion, like who has ownership of it? When you're like, what percentage do you even dictate? Is it 50% AI, 50% human? And then you could still own it. Or that's just kind of an interesting conversation.
And then so along this sort of line of authenticity, I came across this article about, people defining like what it means to be queer. And it talks about how like essentially now younger generations are less prescriptive around labels and how, queerness is more than just, who you desire, like from like a much more sexual sense. But it's again, it's broadening to who you are and as like a whole person, the values you have, like the beliefs you uphold. And I think I found interesting, following the the idea of like authenticity from right before was this quote where this person, whose name is Nightmare, said, "Being boundless with my gender helps me deal with a world that's so binary. I can't change the world, but I can change my world and the world around me." So then, is that how we're responding to this idea of authenticity as well? Like it's no longer, again, objective, but it's purely confined to like how I choose to construct my world and like what I want to, despite a world outside of me that is like, feels so out of control and sort of not objectively like truth, if that makes sense. So I just thought that was like super, super interesting. And it's great to see like how like definitions like this sort of change and evolve over time.
Yeah, this feels very much like high fidelity society in that, even the presence of categories is now almost like we're sort of beyond that of just like we're creating so many. It's almost like being authentic is defined by not fitting into category or being like post-categorical almost.
This one was an interesting tactic that I wanted to surface as part of this discussion. J.Crew like came out with this video called like Table 4, and it's from what I can tell is like a new sort of content series that they're creating. And it's just a conversation around like style and culture where they just gather a few people to just sit and eat and chat. And this one, they gathered a couple writers and like and a magazine editor. And it's just a very normal and casual conversation that they're having. You feel like you're just kind of watching them eat and just, have like almost like a podcast like conversation in a way, but they're all wearing J.Crew. And so it's, you would never know that this was a J.Crew, like this was J.Crew content unless obviously you look at this and it's obviously clearly J.Crew men's like profile. So J.Crew is putting this content together. But I just thought it was interesting because obviously we have like, there's like the traditional ways of trying to sell and promote clothing, but this is a very immersive way in doing that. And like they're changing the experience of like how you can potentially be interested in like J.Crew men's. Without being very super explicit about it, which then also tells us about how sophisticated our consumers have become in the sense that, like, again, we don't want to be sold things. We just want to, like, be a part of these sort of, slightly more immersive experiences. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Alex Delaney. He used to work at Bon Appetit. He was one of the chefs there or food editors there. So he started his own version of using the same format. And that post was sponsored by Puma. So they're wearing like Puma and like they're talking about it in some way, but they're just having a regular conversation. Yeah. So it was engaging. It was fun to watch. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because it's like podcasts, because this is very much like a successor to podcasts, but it's like because it's become such video format, like it's blurring the line between what is a podcast and what is like video entertainment and like just regular media. So it's kind of interesting.
It reminds me of kind of the format too of like chicken. I mean, it's classier, but I mean, so Chicken Shop Date. I don't know if you guys have watched those. Amelia DeMoltenberg.
I love her. Kind of She's like, so funny.
I do too. She's funny. But yeah, just kind of like that podcast, but it's kind of performance and entertainment. So I kind of stumbled upon this in an internet black hole, as one does. So this is about a agency called Brain, and they created an AI garage sale. And it's kind of along the line similar to Mischief and what they do. But essentially, they created an AI garage sale, and you can haggle an AI and multiple AI personalities who are trained to haggle. They're trained on haggling information and like how to haggle the best. And it's interesting. To get people to, haggle, there are real items on this. They actually also interspersed Olivia Rodrigo floor tickets so that people would really want to, actually interact. And because that, again, your items rotate and then also the AI personality rotates. And I think it's super interesting because the personalities, but then just I think it has interesting application for retail and just different experiences you could create online, trying to recreate a Midwestern garage sale essentially online, which I think is funny and fascinating. I haggled with it and I was able to get That was my most I was able to get was $8 off of a singing bass that typically people, had on their walls, the fake bass. So it was kind of fun.
I actually really love this because often when we're talking about AI, we're talking about what do we lose in terms of interaction. And I think we don't realize we just opened a Pandora's box in terms of like, there are so many new experiences. You can have like a bunch of internet riddles that you have to solve to get a discount. Like that never made sense economically before, but now like we can do so much stuff. So I think it's a really important question to ask. What new experiences can you create? Because especially now, while the noise is relatively low, like there's probably going to be some very interesting activations over the next couple of years of brand new experiences digitally with AI.
Yeah. Could you imagine like, I don't know, going to a store and like interacting with an AI of Taylor Swift and she recommends like clothing that to wear to Eras Tour or something? I don't know. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. A changing room mirror that roasts you, like
yeah,
there's
seriously.
just all kinds of stuff that you could do.
Speaking of roasting, so Rebecca and I played around with this and like it roasted us. It roasted both of us. It was just like telling you like, you imbecile, like, do you think that's a great technique? Like, I was like, I'll just walk away from this. Like, I don't really need it. Or like when I was like, one aspect I tried was like, oh, like my grandma would really like this. And it was like, I don't really care about your grandma, just like, it was some of them were mean, but anyways, they're like, it would roast my technique. So yeah. This next section we have is talking about just kind of our shifting expectations about marriage and really who's getting married and like what weddings look like. And so, marriage rates are they've declined. They're actually now back to pre-pandemic levels. But if you look at this chart right here, marriage rates have declined since the 1970s. And essentially like younger generations, don't want to stay single. People are dating. But 2 in 5 do think that marriage is outdated. And one of the barriers to getting married is cost. So the average wedding now, if you look at this chart, is about almost $30,000. Obviously, it dropped during the pandemic, but it is it's getting up there. And so what's happening is 1 in 6 people now are not planning on getting married, but it's more millennials and Gen Z that feel this way. So Gen Z is, more into marriage. And what's also an interesting factor here is that COVID, and we'll see this, I guess, play out if we get data from this year and then also next year of, COVID, people reconfigured their life priorities. And so in that way, marriage rates are potentially predicted to go up because, if you're like, I reconsider relationships, like what do you actually want out of life? And a life turns out, a life partner, is one of those things. And so we might, I think, actually see marriage rates spike a little bit in the coming years as people have like really, especially like Gen Z who were in high school during the pandemic, are now becoming more like marriage age, I'd say. And also because of this price, and I think we're kind of seeing this, you're seeing this on social media, like people are just kind of bucking tradition in terms of weddings. Like I just put this here, but like they're having smaller cakes. They're, going to, a lot of people getting vintage wedding attire because it's more affordable and they can customize it. People are getting rid of, I went to a wedding last November that had a flower ban, like people are doing what is good for the couple because if they're spending so much money on it, it might as well be exactly what they want and they don't need to have traditional things if it doesn't resonate with them. So again, like a more authentic experience with your marriage and your wedding. This next section is about just different ecosystems that seem to be reshaping. And a lot of this has to do with, it seems like infrastructure and just our population and supporting the needs of our population, whether it's on Earth or below the Earth or above it. So just different ways of reimagining, what kind of ecosystem and like what do we need for the future as people. So at face value, this doesn't seem interesting, but so Walmart's adding parcel stations they're testing it with about 40 for faster delivery. Obviously, that is to compete with Amazon, so people are going to potentially be able to get items within 30 minutes at a local place to pick it up. Also, you'll have like, same day receival of packages. Again, competing with Amazon. What I think is interesting about this is it paired with the fact that Walmart is actually a town square for a lot of rural areas because no other grocery stores or restaurants, etc., are going into these areas. So you're actually kind of, again, creating more of a hub, but also these areas are potentially getting more services or more resources or, whatever they're getting online more quickly. And like, what does that mean for businesses they could start or just different, for example, if Walmart gets more into like creating medical hubs, again, just like an interesting in terms of the supply chain, getting resources into rural areas. And will that, again, make it more appealing? Will we have another maybe exodus of some of these services are moving out of bigger cities, another exodus into the country, like we saw during COVID. But again, if this is, I don't know, maybe teeing up something like this. This next part is about something super cool. So in the works is a moon habitat. So Thales Alenia Space signed a contract with the Italian Space Agency, who's also working with NASA, and they're putting a multi-purpose habitat on the moon. So it would be the first permanent outpost on the moon. So it's kind of Italy, France, and the US are kind of working together on this. And so again, permanent human outpost, and America is also, it kind of ties in with our initiatives to bring women and also people of color to the moon with the Artemis program. That's, also aligns with that. But it's, going to be solar powered. It's also interesting, again, that we're just working together to do this with a bunch of other countries. So it, again, will kind of become part of the Artemis program. And it's just kind of a really key, interesting thing, considering it's permanent. It's a permanent structure. And I think that's a big step for, space exploration. And again, space exploration for fun.
I think what's interesting about this is that, if you remember the Earthrise photo from the Apollo missions, and that really was the instigating trigger for a lot of the Endangered Species Act and a lot of pretty significant environmental action. Because we kind of recognize, this kind of increased awareness. I do wonder, we're coming pretty close to, people coming back to the moon, to Mars missions. I mean, within the next decade, both of those things, they may get delayed, but are slated to happen. So if that's the case, are we going to see another sort of increased moment of awareness of sort of potential global unity? I don't know, maybe that's too idealistic, but it's a really interesting question of how this shifts our perspective when we look up and there are people on the moon. That, I think will likely spark some new conversations.
Absolutely. And that they, again, like you said, and I said, they work together to get there too, which I think is important for, I think, our world right now. So this report, I'm even going to go back and look at it again. It was super fascinating. So it's from the Associated Press, and the whole report's about the protein problem. So it's talking about food sources and what we, need to do, because essentially the second agricultural revolution, brought about by, mechanization of farming equipment, et cetera, set the stage for, a lot of population growth between 1700 to 1950. So as the population grew, we had space, so we were able to, grow more crops. And right now, in 1961, we ate about 61.5 grams of protein daily, or that was available per person globally. And 32% came from animal sources. And now we're eating, in 2020, there's more protein available, but 40% is coming from animal sources. And animals need grain. They need, crops. They need, things to eat. And essentially, we're basically running out of room for these crops to grow. Yeah. So, and also our population is, still trending upward overall. So a lot of people are there's different farming technology, which is great, but a lot of the farming technology we've used for thousands of years, obviously it's kind of ruined the soil and different chemicals. And there's a lot of, fertilizer overuse in our land, and then also greenhouse gas emissions. So, we basically are running out of room. So there's, people have suggested, cutting down different forests, but that's not great either. So we're needing to come up with new solutions of basically also raising protein, and then also just figuring out what we're going to do with populations and our farmland. How are we going to feed people going forward? Because that's something we're actually going to need to start thinking about.
Isn't our food actually becoming less nutrient dense because the soil is more depleted? Yeah. Do you ever I've talked about this before, I don't know why I'm into this, but watching social conditioning propaganda videos in the US from the 50s and 60s, where they'd have these infomercials about being a good mom, being a good daughter, all that stuff. And it was always about the meal planning was a big part of it. And foods, even though I know those images were colorized, the greens looked way darker back then. And I think they were actually just darker. I think they had a different composition because of the soil, just a generation ago.
When it comes to this, I'm actually not super concerned. There are a few technologies. There's actually quite a lot that have potential to really do a lot. The big one is smart agriculture. So they have these robots that go through the fields. they have camera. It knows every individual plant and tracks their growth. So it's providing targeted nutrition, and it uses lasers instead of pesticides to deal with weeds. And so you've got less chemicals. It's much better for the soil. The plants are growing far better. So McKinsey has it between like 25 and 70% increase in agricultural productivity. And so that's coming. That's coming soon. And then there's some other really interesting stuff about using kelp. Growing kelp is really interesting because you can grow it at multiple stages down a river. The first stages filter the river, and the later stages you use that kelp for livestock feed. And so there's a lot of like new technologies now. Obviously, the pressure for increased productivity creates the market for those. So I think these go hand in hand. But it does seem that like we have a lot of answers to the question that this is begging.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's what the report goes on with, talking to you about, meat that's generated in the lab. So you don't have to like feed the cattle, and then also protein alternatives like, bugs, or also just like, meat that's protein meat that tastes like meat that's not grown, that's not animal based. So, yeah. This I thought was a great use of, I guess, like public funds. So in Germany, residents will soon be able to actually, and I think it's finished like the end of early this next month. It's an affordable apartment, and it's all 3D printed. So it's about a little over 800 square feet, and people can rent them for the equivalent of about $528. That is subsidized by the government, but the government is paying for this, and it's all 3D printed. So the technology is on par with like the cost with building a regular house or a regular apartment complex, but they're confident that they're going to get the cost down. And then also it's potentially a little bit more safe from like, earthquakes, things like that, because of how it's made. And they can build it very quickly, which is great. Obviously we need global affordable housing, and this is potentially a solution that also works pretty quickly. It was fascinating to kind of see like they have basically like these giant 3D printers set up, but they're kind of like an arm. And so they're creating basically like the bones of this house, and then, it gets built up from there.
This one, we've talked about this idea a lot, and I wanted to just surface it again, and that we're seeing also, just more brands also enter this space. Like Neighborhood New York City was a project that was like started, I think last summer, and there's like currently 23 people living in it, and it aims to, quote, bring high agency, emotionally intelligent New Yorkers within walking distance of one another, or as they call it, quote unquote, clustering. And they're just trying to combine like the serendipity of a college campus, the co-creation of Burning Man and the agency of Silicon Valley, the vigor of Midwestern high school track coach, and the culture of New York City. Their goal is to get to like 100 people, and eventually like 1,000 people. It's interesting. It's like, these like kind of, we talked about how, I think in our internal conversations about how like people are like sort of are, creating these like smaller, like stronger ties, like these like tight knit communities. And, we're seeing them, manifest as like these kinds of almost, commune type situations or co-living situations. So for example, like mommunes is like a phrase that's been used, and a New York Times article like wrote about it in the sense that like moms are now like co-living together and like taking care of their children together, sharing like household responsibilities, etc. And then Haven co-living is like a similar thing, but for wellness lovers, people who just like love wellness and, all the values that come with it. So yeah, just redefining the way people live, and just sort of the question of like, are we just going to see more of this and anticipate more of this into the future is something to think about.
I think what's interesting is there's two layers of infrastructure here. There's the architectural infrastructure, like the urban environment, but then there's obviously people trying to hack something together in spite of that. I think this kind of builds on our thesis of like the era of strong ties, that like it's a gradual but tectonic shift towards more of this. And I think there's like a lot of attention paid now to like walkable cities and walkable environments. I saw a great meme the other day of the only reason why people like Gilmore Girls is because she lives in a walkable city. I think that like that's, we're idealizing this in a very different way now.
Isn't this like no different than retirement communities? Like, is this very novel, or is this not? Like, my mom lived in a place like this, but it was just for older people. And it had a lot of amenities on site and a lot of serendipity. People would run into each other and shared interests. It's not that different from those, right?
It's not, I think the idea of it is not necessarily new, but it is new in the sense that like you're seeing younger people who grew up with this, or we grew up with this idea of like a nuclear family, a single family home. And that's a very different frame of like living compared to what these groups are doing. Yeah. So I'd say it's still a little bit different. This one is like it's sort of a comment on like sustainability and just how we view sustainability. And it's the idea that like there's this new trend, like design trend called interspecies design, in a sense that like instead of it's sort of prioritized the needs of bugs and animals above human beings. So it's the idea that we've we craft our spaces so much, where we're this, like humans are like sort of, the center of the earth type of thing. And sort of it destroys in the process like natural habitats and like potentially the environment around us. And so interspecies design is, considering how, if we can integrate nature into the spaces and like sort of, the goal is about changing our level of respect for other creatures. And it's just like a different way of thinking about sustainability beyond just like, oh, recycle your plastic bottles or, like use less water. But like, what if we actually crafted physical spaces in which animals were just like in our living room? I don't know. It's like, it's a funny thing to think about, but also a new way of considering sustainability.
This next section is, we're calling it the customized self, but it's really about creating experiences, whether that's through music or companionship. That's really for what our needs are, which, again, with we've talked about AI, but with AI, I think it's just become really, really possible to create the experiences that you need at the exact moment you need them, which is fascinating to me. So Jasmine shared this in our internal Slack, and I've have not stopped thinking about it. It's just so interesting to me for so many different reasons. But essentially, there's grief tech that's starting up. So there's different digital estate planning, people turning ashes into diamonds. But really, it's about grief tech where you're able to kind of recreate your loved one potentially. Whether that's through there's a person in this article who, Henley, she lost her mother and she was able to upload text messages and train a chat GPT bot. And so then she's able to essentially talk with this chat GPT bot that's really responds and answers questions and provides advice like her mother would, which is, a great way for her to, I guess it's not saying goodbye, but just kind of continue that relationship, or when she visits her mother, look for advice. I just think there's, other places that do this too, whether it's your story and upload your story and it helps, you could send it to your relatives. Or if you're looking at Replica, you could have potentially, upload and train this person you could interact with in the metaverse, and then maybe in projections that would actually look and sound and be like a loved one. And I think it brings up obviously a lot of debate about the ethical issues of it, of does it help people who are grieving, or does it hinder that grieving process of you never really get out of it, or it slows it down, or what are the ethics of, a lot of celebrities have their rights to their likeness, but I think maybe we as people, the general population, if you didn't give yourself permission to be copied, then we might also need rights to our likeness as well.
I could imagine it's a really, really interesting conundrum of the fan base does not let the celebrity die. They bring them back as an AI, and maybe it's an unsanctioned AI, but they do it anyway because they love the person. And it brings up so many complex social and even legal complications. I think this is there's a lot to think about what this really represents for the human experience here.
Grief tech has been around for a while. I think it's just getting renewed interest now because of AI. So, since I started this job, grief tech there have been startups in grief tech. What was interesting about this article was it actually, now that we have platforms and technologies that can do a reasonably good job of bringing the promise of these applications to life, now we can assess them properly. And the article also talks to therapists about the experiences that people have, because Henley, in this article, at some point realized that the app wasn't really doing what it did in the beginning anymore, right? The voice of her mother kind of had faded from the app. It felt like it was pulling Google results and reading them to her. Somehow she kind of lost her mother in the thread of it. But the therapists here were talking about how they have a hard time seeing how maintaining the memory of someone in a way that makes them feel that they're somehow still material in the world is actually conducive to proper grief. Grief, having gone through it myself, like, you don't know how it's going to hit you. It doesn't happen. The 7 steps don't happen in that order. You don't get to choose when you're willing to deal with the grief. It just shows up when it shows up. Even if you want to like really get it over with, like sometimes you can't tap into that. And they were arguing about the fact that people are robbing themselves of an opportunity to have this very rich human experience of properly dealing with grief, which gives life a lot of meaning, gives people a lot of chance for like reflection, introspection, changing the course of their lives if that's what they see that they want to do. But like when you take away like the grief process, which is what some of these technologies are openly saying they want to do, you're really taking away something that it's a friction that's necessary to human development. I think we're going to see a lot of new technologies that AI touches that do the same thing. And we'll have to ask ourselves, and this is where like, is it a moral question? Or should people be allowed to choose if they want to escape grief or not? That's a big question that I think everyone's going to have a freaking opinion on. But ultimately, people have to answer for themselves. But what's interesting about these technologies is that they're kind of arguing people maybe don't even realize that that's the decision they're making when they upload all of their mom's text messages, for example.
It kind of makes me think of parenting a little bit in that, like, the complaints about helicopter parents that they remove all the obstacles of their kids so they aren't forced to grow. I wonder if there's like something that echoes this with technology, Jasmine, to your point of, technology is going to potentially make life incredibly easy in so many ways at the potential cost of opportunities for growth. What does that look like for, if it happens to an entire generation or two? There's kind of compound effects that we don't know how those interact, but it certainly will change things.
But if Zach was here, like Zach's in my head right now, he's written about how people actually still search, they seek out friction because we don't give up that kind of meaning easily. So like 75 and Hard and everything that he wrote about with, what was it? His article on pain being the new status signal, conspicuous commitment. That's right. So, ebbs and flows. I see things balancing here and there. I think what matters more is what we deem acceptable as a society. That's what matters more in dictating where this goes.
Well, the difference is that the hardship becomes a choice. And so that changes the dynamic.
But as long as we never give up the idea that hardship is a virtue. And not only is that like a highly Christian thing, that's a highly American thing. What branch of Christianity were the Pilgrims?
Oh, Protestant, Puritan.
Puritan.
Yeah.
That's a Puritan value that like, I don't care where you come from. You can have Iranian parents like me. You grow up here, you're going to grow up with that value. I don't know. I feel like it'll take a few generations for that to disappear. All of our mythology is on the virtue of working hard.
Have you guys watched this show Upload from Amazon? This kind of reminds me, like, just of the thing, fascinating things you don't think about that would happen if you decide to upload your consciousness when you pass, like what that entails. Yeah, like the process your loved ones go through if they're hanging on a little too much or, yeah.
What was that cartoon, Johnny, that I shared before? About the robot. We watched it years ago. I'm going to find it and send it to you guys. It's basically like so many years before any of this. It was a short film that got a lot of accolades. I shared it in one of our newsletters, but it's like the story of AI that doesn't let people die. And it's just, if you don't cry at the end of that, it's so innocent. It's like drawn like a children's cartoon. It made you feel a lot. It was very good. I'll send it to you guys.
This next thing is about YouTube. So they are testing what they're calling Dream Track. And what this does is it will, like earlier this year, Drake, an AI song that wasn't Drake, that sounded like Drake, went viral. So it's kind of, I think, made creators think of like, okay, like people are going to copy my work, I might as well like kind of get in on that. So what this does is you're able to use different artists like Troye Sivan, Sia, T-Pain, John Legend, Charlie Puth, Charlie XCX, and you're able to create a song in their voice. You can kind of specify what type of music and like what the song's about. So you can use it to create different things, which I think is really interesting. They had an example about a sunny morning in Florida, and it sounds like T-Pain. This is a cool development. So the UK has approved the first ever CRISPR treatment. So it's a cure for sickle cell disease and also beta thalassemia. So CRISPR stands for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. So essentially, it's a little bit of DNA editing technology but of live organisms. So what it's essentially doing is a treatment that goes in and helps to paste a new gene for hemoglobin into the blood cells. So basically cures you from these diseases. And some of them, if you have different types of thalassemia, can actually be fatal. And it's actually passed down from generation to generation. So they're obviously it's expensive right now, but they're hoping to get the cost down. So right now it's you have to send your blood to this lab and they kind of process it and send it back. But they're kind of looking at ways to, because a lot of people who have sickle cell live in Africa. It's a lot of Black people can get sickle cell in the Black population. And so a lot of health space in Africa aren't necessarily set up with some of the technology. So they're working on better technology where it can be shipped directly to the individual or sent to the individual, or maybe a medical facility, and just the facility can better facilitate and get it to the treatment to more people. And the FDA, it looks like, is going to approve it. So in the US as well. And so obviously just opens up a huge, floodgates for, gene therapy and what that might look like for our society.
Let me ask you guys something. There was all that hoopla about limiting stem cell research when that first came on the scene. And I think it was George W. Bush that ended it. But we're okay with CRISPR as a culture. Nobody's had a problem with CRISPR. I mean, stem cells, I guess you could say, is the beginning of life. But I don't know, where do you draw the line?
CRISPR is based on a virus. So how it works is a little different. Essentially, the analogy is it's kind of like a little zipper. So what it does is it finds a DNA sequence, it unzips it, and then it pastes in a new one. So the DNA has two halves that connect together, and so it'll separate them and then put in the new one. And that's essentially how it works. So it's able to quite literally go in, find and modify your DNA, just like you might, copy paste kind of thing. So it's a remarkably powerful technology, and the fact that this is getting approval, we're going to see so much stuff coming out of this.
Okay, but why are we okay with this, which is literally changing your genetic code, but then we had a problem with, it was stem cells, right?
Stem cell research that's an ethical complaint about fear or concerns that an embryo is alive, the embryo is life. So that's a question, that's a moral quandary about when is something alive, because people believe a fertilized embryo is that's where life begins.
I thought the issue was that people were worried that you could create custom embryos. And it's well, this is also changing the natural order of things. Take the earlier ethical conversation out. They're they're mirror images of each other in terms of the argument.
I mean, this is a potentially dangerous technology. So in that regard, it's very similar, because there's two things that can happen. One is you can modify genes, and then, a generation later, those people have kids, and then you realize, oh, this had a bunch of unintended consequences. That is a very real concern, that you can kind of poison the population, genetically speaking. The other concern is that, you could do a bunch of stuff. You could make your kids smarter in vitro. And then the question is that, what is allowed for genetically modifying your baby? Is that, we already screen for a bunch of stuff, and we already, I think, have allowed certain very specific gene editing of embryos before they're born, in the womb, to prevent certain, diseases and very serious illnesses. It's a pretty small hop, skip, and a jump to, I'm going to make my kid more attractive and smarter.
And also, I think it's forget embryos, but live, it's for live organisms. So you could, I don't know, you could take yourself, could you edit your genes and make yourself at this age smarter, or, different things like that. I think that's what's kind of maybe the concern I was asking Rebecca, what mod should you make of yourself? What could you do to yourself? Could you give yourself a certain color eye? Could you make yourself taller? But to your point, John Louis, we don't know everything about the genome, right? Like you said, if we take out certain genes, how does that change or trigger or turn off other genes going forward?
Yeah. I mean, the fact is that this is an insane frontier, and we're going to see a ton of progress. That's the underlying thing, but you're absolutely right. The sky is the limit, which is terrifying to some extent. It's exciting and terrifying.
Great. So chaotic masculinity. I think, more and more we're seeing, similarly to what we were talking about the authenticity earlier on in the conversation, it's like this the definition of masculinity also changing and evolving in different ways. And, again, as with every definition, it feels like now it's splintering. And, now what does it mean to be masculine? And I think we're in an era right now where a lot, it's feeling kind of chaotic and messy, and we're sort of in a little bit of an identity crisis when it comes to what it means to be masculine. And yeah, so we'll just go through those signals now. There was this first signal, there was a large scale study that basically showcased that, in fact, feminists don't hate men. It does seem kind of obvious on the surface, but there is a preconception, especially in the US, that if you're a feminist, it means that you have a bias against men, or you think men suck or whatever. I mean, it doesn't help that also in our pop culture we tend to capitalize on man hating, which is a whole different thing. But yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, this study just kind of proves again that it's not only untrue that feminist attitudes towards men are negative, but they're actually more broadly positive and broadly similar to other people's attitudes towards men. So then again, even though feminism is on the rise, it's in the UK with 70% of women identifying as feminists, and the US is also seeing a rise too, though again the issue is more polarized. And then in that, with many thinking it's unfairly blames men for the challenges women face.
Well, I would imagine it's hard not to feel attacked, even if people are just even if you say it in the most unbiased way, it's not easy to hear.
And then also at the same time, we're seeing more increasing prevalent cases of muscle dysmorphia in men. And so it's a really interesting conversation because we've also normalized taking care of yourself and going to the gym, and a lot of body dysmorphia conversation has mainly been around how women feel about their bodies, and that has a lot to do with again how we've become much more aware of how we look, and therefore we've normalized that now Botox and things like that as part of our self-care. And we've seen that in male spaces too, we're seeing Botox, more men taking care of how they look. And I think part of that too is contributing is the fact that we just see our faces a lot more than we've ever in the past, especially with social media and things like that. But what that's also done in the process is now there is a rising amount of men who are a little bit more obsessive, getting more obsessive about how they look in terms of their muscles, because they're seeing very unrealistic portrayals of men on social media of how your body has to look or should look. It is a concerning thing that we're having to figure out. I feel conflicted about it because it's sort of okay, it's great that is it in correlation to the fact that men are allowed to be more take care of their looks a little bit more, you know what I mean? But in doing that, is that also a bad thing? And just I don't know, it's just something that I was thinking about.
It's a fine line. You should be able to do whatever you want with your body, but the hope is that it would make you happier and not come from a place where it might potentially make you more unhappy. It's interesting. I think people consistently forget something that can poison being a woman eventually will poison everybody. And so these were originally women's problems, but now they're everybody's problem. And I think that's why, the feminist movement, should gain traction because it addresses stuff like this. On a very different note, I do love how the whole language vehicle of bro has just been so effective. Brotox is one of the most effective terms. Somebody else the other day, Colin Nagy I think he was on X or something. He was talking about he loves the broetry of the LinkedIn posts that founders post, where it's one line, one line, one line. And I was just oh my God, I love it. It's a whole genre.
I will never forget. I was a Barnes and Noble in college, and there was actually a book called Broetry. And it's about just drinking beer, but they're poems, and it's one lines. Anyways, you should look it up. It's funny.
It works so well.
One concern that I have is that in female spaces, we do see a lot of support for emotional support for how to deal with body dysmorphia, things like that. But right now with men and mental health, that's still very much a growing area in which there's not a ton of support there. So that's obviously my only concern is that even as men are going through this struggle, the fact that they also have a hard time already kind of admitting to the fact that this is a problem, but also seeking out support is a whole other thing that needs working.
Absolutely right. That's an extremely astute observation, for sure.
Onto hunting. So it really interestingly that they found that they're trying to, so there's this petition that they're trying to change like blaze orange to blaze pink. So like, the garments that they wear and like also the color on their guns, like is usually orange, but they're finding, scientists found that pink is actually a way more effective color for not only being seen, so, safety reasons, but then also deer actually can't see pink. So then it actually increases your likelihood of being able to hunt. So you can actually hunt more deer, wearing pink and using pink. But as you can tell by what I'm saying is that a lot of men tend to have like adverse reactions to the color pink. And that like, one person quoted saying that like, I think I would get shot here in Texas if I got caught hunting in pink, like it feels like such a silly like situation, but it's kind of like that. It just tells you that like this issue is not a matter of science or education. It's very much a cultural, like emotional, stereotype, or like there's like a much more like, again, like an identity issue than it is an actual factual thing. Because, the facts say that this is actually better for you. But in doing so, there's also been like more women joining on the sport. And that was, I don't think that was like necessarily like I don't think they did that on purpose, but it has drawn more women to hunting as well. And then so thinking about sort of like masculinity, we talked about obviously like finding support for men especially, and how to like really see masculinity as like not just like something that Andrew Tate necessarily says, but something that's much more healthy and productive. And this influencer, his name is Tony P, and he's just like this very like you can't help but like fall in love with him because he's just very positive, and like he has a very healthy way of looking at masculinity in the sense that he's coined this term called vibrant masculinity, and that he's saying that vibrant masculinity means that it's okay to be assertive or go after your dreams, to want a leadership role, but at the same time, like, you need to know like when to sit back or listen or let someone else take the lead as well. It also means you can hang out with your friends, like you can like listen and let, or like joke around and be sarcastic and like, be intimate with your friends too. So it's sort of this like beautiful balance of like being like, you can do all these quote unquote like masculinity, like bro-y things, but then also have intimate relationships with your friends, and that like, that most people might stereotypically perceive as like being feminine or whatever. And so he uses his lifestyle or like his own life as like a sort of a touch point to sort of, I don't want to use the word evangelize, but for some reason that's the only word that's coming up in my head right now. But, encourage like a much more healthy viewpoint of masculinity. This next section is the spaces we work. These are just a couple slides that I wanted to compare next to each other because I just thought they were interesting. So we just go straight to the next one. We might have seen this like circling, but the New York Times like talked about like how can we make offices Instagrammable enough to convince young workers to come into the office? And the answer is no. But I just find it very interesting that like companies are still working very, very hard to try to get people to come back into the office when like the overwhelming consensus is that nobody wants to do that. And so they're pulling out the stops and like, oh, if we make our offices like Instagrammable enough, then like they'll want to be a part of it. But then if you go to the next one, the person that designed the wing is doing designing co-working spaces in suburbs for women. And I think that's actually kind of smart. Like, so then these spaces are not like huge office buildings or anything like that. They're small. They almost look like homes, like in these sort of suburban areas where more likely to see like working women, like working moms, for example, like maybe want to work like somewhere outside of their house. I just thought it was a good comparison in the sense that like, why are we, like these spaces like this feel much more appealing than to like build an Instagrammable office where like you're having to force everyone to show up. Like it's just sort of like a product market fit issue sort of thing. It's like, it feels like the attention is in the wrong place. So from a company standpoint, if you want to get people to like be more productive, if that's the goal, then, there are other ways of doing that than to try to force people to come in and take pictures of the office. I don't know.
These are just some general signals that maybe didn't fit into a theme, but that we still thought were interesting and should be included.
This one is, I think we talked about like lipstick theory. We talked about pumpkin, and Holly was talking about like pumpkin spice latte theory, in that mini beauty is profiting a lot. So there's like a lot of growth there, in that like, like the minis, like the travel size type products have, grew 16% over the last 12 months to reach $1 billion. And I just wanted to bring it up because it kind of feels like similar to like lipstick theory, or the idea, I wonder like when there is recession or like a looming recession, like people are more likely to want to buy many things because obviously it's less expensive, but you can still enjoy the luxury of like having this more expensive type item. And And then intuitive intimacy. So this was based on a Bumble, I guess like trend report, talking about how 80% said that they wanted partners to have an understanding of how to get intimate both physically and emotionally, and that emotional intimacy was more important to them than sex. And so the idea that like the way that we're searching for partners is very different, and that like, you know, the way actually it's like how we're prioritizing relationships is based on how we the emotional aspects of it more than just like the physical aspects of it. That's it. I think that's it. Those are all of the signals.
That was awesome. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.